Bonjour, everyone. Hello. Bonjour, monsieur. My name is Mariella Crea, and I am privileged to be here today with you. And I will be sharing my mother's story. Unfortunately, I was thinking about bringing my mother, but she's in the late stage of Alzheimer. And I would have to run around trying to catch her for an hour, so that was not a good idea. So we decided I'm just going to be my mother's voice today and always until she passed on. I will be her voice and telling her story and sharing it with the schools and everyone who wants to hear it, because I think it's a beautiful story. I'm very proud of her and her family for doing what they did during World War II. My mother, Jacqueline, as you can see her picture here, she was about 17 years old in France. She was born on the 5th of November, 1928, in a suburb of Paris, a place called Saint-Cloud. Maybe some of you know of Saint-Cloud, have heard of it. It's a very nice area. Our mother was French. Her name was Lucie Beausoleil. And her father was an Italian from the north of Italy who came to Paris, France, for work. They met and got married, and they got 2 children together. My mother, Jacqueline, and her brother, Serge, who was younger than my mother. Unfortunately, my mother lost her mother when she was 8 years old. It was during the war, and Lucie Beausoleil, who was my mother's mother, contracted tuberculosis. And at the time, they didn't have a cure yet. So a few months later, she passed away. But during that time, it was a very hard time for my mother. The French health department came and removed the children from my grandmother, Lucie, and my grandfather, Charles Garcia. They had to be placed in an orphanage until a better situation was offered to them. They couldn't stay around their mother, who was very sick, and was placed in a hospital for tuberculosis right outside of Paris. My grandfather, Charles Garcia, who was Italian, didn't speak very well French at the time, had to find a job. He was a mason. He was building houses and couldn't take care of his children. So he contacted his mother-in-law in Selma, which is on a route to Germany. That's a little town in East Germany. If we can get here we are. Okay, so we have France. We're halfway to France. Selma-les-Bains, it's close to Bar-le-Duc. Some of you have been to Alsace, Strasbourg. I mean, it's still far away from Strasbourg, but it's a very, very small town in the Marne, department of the Marne. So the children were removed from the orphanage and taken to their grandmother's house, to Selma-les-Bains, if we can see the house. The house is, I was fortunate, I went back 11 years ago, and the house was still standing up. It was very decrepit, dilapidated. This is the house of their grandmother in Selma-les-Bains. Now, I heard recently that the house has been torn down. It's not non-existent anymore, so I'm very lucky to have been able to take a picture of it. It had a crawl space. It was a 2-room house. It had no running water and no electric heater. So it was very primitive. It was the war. What can we say? You know, they didn't have much at that time. The move was made. The children were taken to Selma-les-Bains, to that house where their widow grandmother was living there, very sickly. She was already 75 years old, and she was not ready to take on 2 young children, but she did it for her daughter, who had passed on, and she took the 2 children in. So my mother, who was about 10 at the time, became the, how I would say, the provider, because the grandmother was so old and sickly, which, I mean, 75 years old is not old, but she was sick, Sorry. Because I'm getting there and I don't think it's old. 75 years old is not old, but she was very sick, okay? And she had lost 3 daughters just before the war, 2 to TB and 1 to meningitis. So she was not ready to have 2 young children in our house, even though the house was very small. So my mother became the provider in a way. She would have to go through the fields to get to farms, to get milk, to get butter. They had food stamp at the time. It was the war. Food was very scarce, so she was the only one who could do it. The brother was too young. They couldn't take the chance. So my mother would, they didn't have a car. They didn't have a bicycle. Everything was done by foot. And you didn't want to be caught by the Germans at the time either, even though you were not Jewish, but you never knew how they were going to react to a young girl. So my mother would go through the forest, through the field, and she would bring back food to the house. Our grandmother was from Luxembourg. Her name was Marie Boutolz. And the town of Selma-les-Bains was so small. It was 2,281 people living there at the time. Then Uncle Henry Beausoleil, who's coming to play here. I'm going through what I prepared here. So sorry if we change the pictures on you too often. Marie Boutolz, the grandmother, had 1 son left. Her 3 daughters were gone. And she was left with 1 son who just got married and just had a child, a little girl. Her name is Eliane. She's still alive today. She's 90 years old. And Uncle Henry lost his wife in the old time. Some of you probably know that or heard about it or saw pictures. In a small town, they didn't have a laundromat because that was during the war. So they had some lavoir, we call it. It's a big area where women would get on their knees and wash their clothes. Well, apparently, Uncle Henry's wife that day didn't feel well or something happened. She was washing the clothes of her baby and fell into the lavoir. Never came home, so at a certain time, everybody was worried about her, and they went to the lavoir. They knew she had went to wash clothes. Well, they found her at the bottom of the lavoir. She had drowned. She was still holding her baby clothes in her hands. So Uncle Henry had to take care of his young child, and so she was placed with her maternal grandmother because Marie Boutolz already had 2 children to take care, so she couldn't take on another baby. So Uncle Henry, that you're seeing his picture right now, worked at the train station in Revigny-sur-Ornain. Revigny-sur-Ornain, it's about 1 mile or 2 from Selma-les-Bains. And he had been working there for 10 years. He was a switchman there. And Revigny-sur-Ornain was a very important place. It's where the train were coming through on their way to Germany. That was pretty much their final stop, and then on to Germany. So we get to that in a minute. Then the war began, and the exode, the invasion. French people were going crazy. You would see them on the road with bags of things. They didn't know where to go. The Germans were coming, and it was a frightening thing. My mother remembered being with our grandmother. They packed some things in rags and just left the house and went into the forest. They would hide in the forest from the Germans. And they found this little shack in the forest that the hunters used to use when they were hunting. And they lay there for the night. And in the middle of the night, they heard some commotion out there, and it was the Germans. So they kicked the door down, and my mother was there with her brother and their grandmother, and they were very scared. They thought, that's it, we're going to be killed. But when they saw this old lady, and again, 75 is not old, but she looked a little elderly because she was a sick lady. I want to stretch it out. So anyway, they felt sorry for her and those 2 young children. So they didn't shoot them. They let them go. So then my mother's grandmother decided, well, they didn't shoot me now, I guess they won't shoot me later. We might as well go back to our little house. So they packed up their little few things and went back the next day to their house in Sermaises-les-Bains. The Germans were camping in Sermaises-les-Bains. They had established a campground. So they were there. Everybody had to be extremely careful because you never knew their reaction. Even if you were not Jewish, you never knew what they would do. So French people were extremely careful. So Hitler commands removals of the Jews in France. So in Paris, 65,000 Jews were deported or sent to camps. Now, France had some camps. We had 49 camps, but they were transit camps. They were not concentration camps, except one in Alsace, close to Strasbourg. The Nazi opened that camp. So that particular camp was a concentration camp. They had the gas chamber and they had the crematorium. But that was the only one. The rest of France, they had 49 camps, all transit camps. So all these Jewish people were deported, and 65,000 of them went to Drancy. And 6,000 of the children that were there, unfortunately, were killed. And 63,000 of Jewish people were killed also. So then the French resistance started. It was a group of people, I'm sure you heard about it, who rebelled. They were against what was going on with the Germans and what they were doing to the Jewish people. And they decided to form this resistance against the Germans. And it worked very well. I mean, a lot of the people from the French resistance were killed, unfortunately, because when the Germans would, a lot of French informant would go to the Germans and inform them of those people who were collaborating with the French resistance, then people would be shot. So the rescue at Rovigny. Now we're going to Rovigny-sur-Ornain. Rovigny-sur-Ornain is 2 miles away from Sermaises-les-Bains. Keep that in mind. That's where my mother was living with her grandmother. And the Uncle Henry was living there also. So Uncle Henry's job at the train station, he was the switchman. So you remember in the old time, the locomotive had to be refilled with water. They worked with steam. So that was pretty much the last stop to Germany, to refill the water in the locomotive and also to process the triage. And most of you know what a triage is, but I see a young girl over there, a young little girl. She may not know what a triage is. So I tried to explain it because I always go in front of the schools and they don't know what triage is. Triage, we use that in the medical field, military field, sorting of people, okay? So in Rovigny-sur-Ornain, the triage was taking place. All the Jewish people that were brought in from Paris, other areas in France, other camps, would end up in Rovigny-sur-Ornain, and then the triage, women with women, older people with older people, young people with young people, children, people could work, people were too old to work. Everybody was, sorted by categories. And of course, the Germans were very busy at that time because the water was going into the locomotive, they were processing the triage, and that was the right time because Uncle Henry had worked at the train station for so many years. He knew all the places where that he could use to hide people. But he needed someone to help him because while he was there and the triage was going on, he still had to show his face in uniform that he was working there. So he needed someone. And he decided, after talking with the French resistance, that my mother was going to be the one. He had a daughter, and people asked me, well, why didn't he use his daughter? Well, she was pregnant. So he couldn't use her because there was too much physical things to do when you were running through the field. And as we go on, you'll find out more where they were hiding people. So Rovigny also was a very important location for the Germans. The supplies to the German troops for Normandy were coming through Rovigny. So that's why the British allies were trying to bomb Rovigny, because all the ammunitions were coming from Germany to go to Normandy to prepare for the Allies' invasion on D-Day. So a lot of things were going on in Rovigny-sur-Ornain at that time. Uncle Henry decided he was going to talk to my mother and tell her what her role was going to be. And at the time she was 12 years old. And what she would have to do, and not to talk to anyone, because they had to be extremely careful with the informants. We had a lot of French informants that would inform the Germans for money, for food, for things. So they had to be extremely careful, and they could have got shot right on the spot. And they didn't mind to shoot a child, you know. That was nothing for them to do. So Jacqueline received her orders, and she was ready. They trained her. Even at 12, she knew what she had to do. She had to wait for her Uncle Henry's instruction. So the train would come in, the triage would go on, and at that time, when the triage was going on, that's when Uncle Henry would come in and grab some people. My mother, Jacqueline, would be waiting close to the water tower because they were putting water in a locomotive. And the main place, the main hiding place, was the water tower. So the people that they would help to escape while the Germans were occupied for other things. And here you see one of the water tower, and you see that little ladder that goes up. Now, in the summertime, it was no problem. It was warm. You know, it's not so bad soaking in water for a few hours. But in the wintertime, now, on the way to Germany, it's very cold. It was freezing. So my mother would be waiting behind the water tower for the sign, for the instruction from her uncle. When he would tell her it was ready to make the move, she would come and get the people and take them to the water tower. They would have to climb that little ladder, get in that tower, inside of it, with their clothes on. And sometime, like I said, if it was warm, it was okay, but when it was cold, it was bad. But that was, you know, a decision they had to make to be safe. So they would wait in there. My mother still would be waiting back there. And then Uncle Henry, who was in charge of the train station, would know when the train would depart. Then he would give her instruction again once the train had left. Sometimes the Germans would realize some people were missing. So the train wouldn't leave for a while, and they would be searching all around Rovigny and then going all the way to Selma, because the railroad track was going all the way to Selma and on to Germany. So they would check for these people, the escapees, but they couldn't, they never found them. That's what she told me. She said then she was never caught. Luckily for her and luckily for the people that she was helping out. They were never caught. They always made it to safety. Once the train left, then our role came to play again. Our uncle would give her the instruction to tell the people to come out of the tower. So they would come out of the tower, and then she would proceed to take them on foot, by foot, in the fields, through the forest. They couldn't take the road because the Germans were patrolling. So here is the, I need to slow down a little bit. I get carried away here. My husband's trying to show you the route.
About 3 miles.
So all that on foot, wet, cold most of the time. But they would make it to the house of my grandmother, great-grandmother. They would be there. They would have dry clothes for them. Nothing spectacular, but just dry clothes. They would feed them the little bit they had. They did have a little, someone asked me one time, I always remember, Chris. She said, well, what did they eat? It was the war. I said, well, they had a little, you know, a garden in the back of the house. We can't see it, where they grew little tomatoes and little things like that. So they would make soup most of the time. They didn't have much, but the little bit they had, they would share. They would change clothes and stay warm, and they would hide them in a crawl space. Especially if the Germans were looking for them, they had to be somewhere where they wouldn't find them. So, and they had to be extremely careful because of the informant. That little house that you saw where my mother's grandmother lived, they had like about 20 little houses like that. It was like a project housing. And so some of these people could tell. So they had to be extremely careful to bring these people. They would go through the back of the house and be very, very, very careful. My mother said many times she was scared to death. She could hear the German shepherds of the soldiers barking. They were getting closer and closer to the house, but they never came to the house, so that was a good thing. Then, at that moment, she would have to wait for nighttime to come. Those were the instructions of our uncle. You have to wait for nighttime, and I will give you again the instruction at when you're going to make the switch. So they had to wait for nighttime, and then at nighttime, she would get everybody together, ready, and then she would take them back to the next point, which was in the forest, where someone from the French resistance was waiting there for her to bring these people. And then, again, by foot, they would be led to Switzerland by the French resistance to safety. So she would take these people to that location in the forest where someone was waiting for her from the French resistance. And from there, they would take over. They'd take over, and they would take them a day or two to get to Switzerland, but eventually they would get there. They all made it to safety, to Switzerland. The war ends, and the Allies came to liberate France, and I have a little note here. It's a French Jew that wrote this. And he wrote a book about it, and it's called Abus de confiance, meaning breach of trust. And his name is Jean-Jacques Frankel. I survived, and this is what he said. I survived the war because of the dedication of those who hid us, because of Catholic schools. The proportion of French Jews saved in France, it's also the highest of Western Europe. The massacre would have been much greater without French people, the resistance, and the lower Catholic clergy. So you see, if French people didn't get involved, it would be a larger massacre than it was. So thank God people did the right thing. Some of them, not all of them. I mean, we did have some very bad French people who did very nasty things. Later on, after the war, the Jewish people who made it went back to Paris because a lot of them were French, and they opened some textile factories and stores, and they tried to get back with Uncle Henry. They wanted to thank him. They wanted to make some suits for him, but Uncle Henry was a very humble man. He really didn't need a suit. He lived in the country. He was farming. He didn't need a suit. And really what he wanted, he wanted to... He made a vow of silence. Everything that had left him, letters or pictures or things, he destroyed everything. He was so afraid that even after the war, the collaborateur would get to him and he would be killed. So he did not want to speak about it to anyone. It was really hush-hush. He said, I did what I was supposed to do. I was not going to stand by and witness some horrors, the brutality, the inhumanity that took place during the Holocaust, and especially when he was at the train station and he was witnessing this brutality that was going on. He was not going to be a bystander. So he was happy of what he did and never regretted, but just didn't want to talk about it. It was a passage of his life that was over. And he figured, I did what I was supposed to do. I can sleep at night. I have a clear conscience. I saved some lives. let me see. So he burned all the evidence. And then Jacqueline, at that time, she was getting a little older, and her father, Charles Garcia, had found a job in France and found a new wife. She was from Czechoslovakia. Her name was Thérèse Mesco. So he got, well, they didn't get married, they just lived together. I hate to say that, but what can you do? He was a bad Catholic. So anyway, so he didn't marry her, they lived together. But it was good in another sense, because he said he loved his first wife so much that he could never love someone else as much. So that's why he didn't marry that second lady, but she was a very nice lady too. So he got his children back, brought them back, and they went back to Saint Cloud, and then my mother met my father. My father was also Italian, from the north of Italy, from Piacenza, and had came to France for work, because some Italians came to the United States, but others just went to where it was closer. France was closer. So he came to France for work and didn't find any work because it was the war at the time. So he decided, he made a very poor choice. He had heard it was work in Germany. So that was against the French law to go and work in Germany. So he made a very bad choice. But again, he didn't have a job, so he thought he was doing the right thing. So he went to Germany, went to Berlin. And when he arrived in Berlin, didn't speak a word of German, someone stole his wallet. Remember, it was still the war. So his wallet was stolen, didn't have any identification on him, any money, everything was gone. So he was very hungry, and he decided to steal some fruit at a fruit stand, and was caught. And the Germans don't play around. He was put in a prisoner camp close to Buchenwald, I believe. He almost died there. It was very cold, he said. The diet, it was like a potato a day with a bowl of soup. He said you had to learn German if you wanted to survive, because when they call your name and your number, if you don't answer, you didn't eat. So you realize quickly that for your survival, you better learn German. So he did learn German. And one day, this SS colonel, I believe he was a colonel, came. He was coming to inspect the prisoner camp. And so all the prisoners were put outside in the cold, and my father almost died. He was very, very sick. This German colonel, SS, came to visit the camp, inspect the camp and the prisoners. So they lined them all up outside, and you know how they do, they walk by, and they had to tell their names and their numbers. And so my father did just that, and then went backwards, and then there was the next prisoner. And at one point, when the SS was finished inspecting the prisoners, he spoke to another high-ranked German officer there, and my father said we couldn't hear what he was saying. But then at one point, the SS colonel came back to my father. He singled out my father, and my father said, "Oh my God, I'm dead. Why is he coming back to me again?" So he went back to my father, and he asked him in German, "Alfred, what can you do?" And my father said, "I'm a mechanic." He said, "Are you a good mechanic?" My father said, "Yeah, I'm not going to tell you I'm a bad mechanic. I'm a good mechanic." So he said, "Okay, well, you come with me." So he took my father with him to his camp. He had a camp himself, a prisoner camp. He took my father to his camp, and he told him, "You are going to fix the SS cars. You are going to live in this garage. You're going to sleep in the garage with the cars, and I want them fixed, every one of them. When we're ready to go, they better be working." And in return, it was a warm garage, and they would give him a bucket of scraps from the SS festivities, He would eat just like an animal out of the bucket, but it was food. It was better than what he was getting where he was, before. So one day he dared to ask one of the, how you would call someone that was working in the camp, and why was I singled out? And he said, because your first name is Alfred. And the SS colonel's first name was Alfred. So he felt something for my father because they had the first name. So you never know in life, in a situation that you are, that you could be saved just because of your first name. He felt something for my father because his first name was Alfred, just like him. So then my father was saved. My father gained weight again, and he was able, when the war was ended, to return back home, and that's when he met my mother. But he was saved by an SS soldier, basically. He would have died in the camp where he was. He was undernourished and very sickly. He wouldn't have made it. So, and luckily, because of his trade, that he was a mechanic, and he needed a mechanic at that time, so that was perfect. My father returned to Saint-Cloud, France, where his family was living, and he met my mother, and they were married. Okay, this is Eliane. This is Uncle Henry's daughter with my mother. They're in Selma-les-Bains in 1947. Now, Eliane is still alive. She's 90 years old. I'm going to see her at the end of this month. I'm going to France, and I'm going to try to get as much information out of her. She has given me quite a bit so far, plus what I knew from my mother and my father. Because when I was growing up, right after the war, we didn't have a television, we didn't have iPods, we didn't even have a phone. So the excitement was to have dinner at the dinner table and listen to your parents' stories. And when you're young, you said, oh, not again, I got to listen to this again. But now I am so happy that I listened to my mother and my father's story, because I think it's a beautiful story. And I'm so proud of especially my mother. I'm very proud of her. I'm proud of my dad too, but my mother was she's really my hero, even though she has Alzheimer now and she's a different person, but she's my hero. This is Uncle Henry with his granddaughter, Giselle, in 1967. And she's still alive also, so I will be seeing her at the end of the month when I go to France.
So Giselle was the person in utero at the time that Jacqueline was enlisted, because her mother
was pregnant. She was expecting Giselle.
That's the girl who was...
Yes, she was pregnant with her, so that's why my mother was chosen. Plus, my mother was fair, and I think that they took that in consideration too. She had kind of blondish, strawberry color hair, and I think they figured she would blend in with the Germans. They wouldn't really pay attention to her, because she was so fair. But so now my mother, we'll get back to my mother. My father passed away in 2003, and I'm the only child. So my father's last wishes were to come back to America. So he was cremated, and actually I brought everybody back to America. I brought the dog, I brought the urn, I brought the luggage, I brought my mother. Everybody came back. Unfortunately for my mother, people ask me, well, does she speak English? She doesn't. And I always said, how do you teach an Alzheimer patient how to speak a foreign language? It's not going to happen. But we found, well, my husband likes to tell this part, so I'm not going to take it away from him. She's here in Georgia. Everybody loves her. She's very kissy type. French people, we love to kiss. And she hugs everybody. That's why I couldn't bring her here, because she would have to kiss everyone in here and hug you and then start running around. So that, the late stage of Alzheimer. But even before, she was always very affectuous. But she has a companion. Well, now she has two, actually. But for the longest time, she had a companion. And one day I was bringing her back from a male companion. One day I was bringing her back from the doctor, and it's important. You'll understand at the end of my story how important this is. So I was bringing her back from the doctor, and this lady was pulling out of the parking lot. Then she saw me. She came back into the parking lot. Then she came out and she said, "Oh, I didn't know you were Jacqueline's daughter." She said, "I love your mom, even though I don't understand a thing she said." She said, "But she kisses me all the time. She loved my dad." She said, "They're together all the time." She said, she says she feeds him, he feeds her, he follows her around, he carries her jacket. And so she said, I want to know more about your mom. Can you tell me a little bit more about your mom? So we start talking, and of course, I don't know how, but she was asking me so many questions. I start telling her about what my mother lost her mother when she was young, and blah, blah, blah. I said she had an interesting life. And then I covered a little bit, in a little bit of time that I had with her, what she used to do when she was a young girl. And she said, "You're giving me chill bumps." And I said, "Oh, really?" And she said, I'm a Jew. So I found out that now our companion is a Jewish man. So you see, it came to circle. Here she was helping when she was a young girl, and now as an older lady, she's got to protect her. The people there told me, they said she gets very emotional, very hangry if they take her to the bathroom or they take her away from him. He gets physical sometimes. So this is Starkey, Mr. Starkey, and this is my mother.
Roach. His first name is Starkey.
Right.
His last name is Roach.
Yes,
Starkey.
and as you can see, he's holding her hands and he's carrying her jacket, and nobody better not come there and take her away from him. And so I asked the ladies there, I said, "But what do they do all day? They walk around, your mother's talking. I said, "But he doesn't understand." She said, "No, it must be the French accent that he likes. He doesn't understand a thing." He must like her French accent, she said, because he doesn't understand what she said. But I said, "Okay, whatever." But they're always together, and they feed each other. When one doesn't want to eat, she gives him like a baby, and they live in their own little world, and they're happy that way, you know. But I thought, what a coincidence. I mean, it's a full circle, you know. Here she was helping when she was young, and now she's got someone who's watching over her who has the same disease, the same sickness, and he happens to be Jewish. So I thought that was a miracle. You know, I said, here's another miracle. Now I don't have to worry about her. She's got a French doctor, and she's got a protector there. So this is my mother now, as we speak today. That's what she looks like. So you can tell the disease is progressing and taking so many things away from her. But at least she's got Mr. Starkey there. But when I do this presentation, I thank the Bremen for letting me present my mother's story, because I think it's important for people to know that there is some good people out there that will do the right thing, that won't be a bystander, that won't turn their head the other way when they see something that, you know, it's dreadful wrong. And also, because I go to so many schools, because the Bremens send me there, all over the place, I was fortunate enough to meet some wonderful children, and they had made a display for the Holocaust. They went online and they found, it was, how many names that they picked up? The school in Fayetteville of children, when they had that wall, that was all the pictures of the children. They had the butterfly hallway, but also they had a wall.
40 or 50 personal stories.
40 or 50 personal stories of children, Jewish children. They researched them on the computer. Each child had his own story. And I happened to be so moved that I picked two names. One was Zach George Cohn. He was 8 years old. And Baruka Bentitu, she was 13 years old. And she went to camp, and she was, you know, killed there. And I like to mention their name every time I do my presentation of these two children that I don't know them, never heard of their family, but I was very moved, and I also want to share with you that that school had made the 8th graders hallway. They had made some butterflies that represent how many children?
Each butterfly was 300 children that had.
And I tell you, when I started walking that hallway, I had tears in my eyes. It was so beautiful. They had, you know, colored them, all these different colors, and they were representing all these Jewish children. It was very moving to me as a mom, you know, to see all these children who were destroyed by these evil people. I'm sorry, I hope nobody's German in here. Well, like I said, this is my mother's story. I'm very proud of her and her family. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer you. And I'm sorry, I apologize for being a little... Thank you. I get emotional. He tried to pick the one who were not as close to the German soldiers, and the one that were trying to escape. He would grab them and then hide them right away, and then switch them with my mother when they were, you know, they were so busy during the triage. It was really chaotic at that time. So that's when he would help them.
So he would have old and young.
Yes, whatever was in his reach at the time. And again, it couldn't be too many at the time, because then the French people would suspect something. So, but I know it was several trains that were coming through a day. So each train, he was trying to get as many as he could, but still yet, he couldn't have like 50, because first of all, the house was too small to host 50 people. And then too many people around, they would suspect that they were, you know, what they were doing. So they had to be extremely careful so they wouldn't get shot on the spot. They didn't, you know, she was 12 years old. She didn't keep the count. I'm sure Uncle Henry did, but again, he destroyed everything. He was so afraid of being caught for doing it. It's a lady that offered to write a book for me. She's a writer, and that's why I'm going to France at the end of this month to get more information about the train station and all that, so we can incorporate that in the book when she writes it. Mrs. Goldstein, you said, yes. Because again, he was a very humble man. He did not want any recognition, but he was just happy, you know, he felt good about himself from doing what he did. So that's why I'm doing this. Oh, the children are so amazing, so amazing. I have letters in my bag right now. As a matter of fact, I carry them with me. My little, I want to show you, because I was going to give them to you too to read. But I'll read you one or two. This is what they give me. I mean, some of them are very moving. Some of them, they're saying, now I know what to do. I know when to do the right thing, and bonjour, this one, and they make them themselves. But very appreciative, very interested. And thank you for coming, talking to our 8th grade class of 2014 about what your mother did, great uncle did for the Jewish children of the Holocaust. It must be amazing for you, for your mother, plus great uncle, to be Holocaust hero. They were not heroes, but the Holocaust was terrible. I don't see how any person could be so heartless, treat other human being like that, Jewish or not. Our class of 2014 appreciate you telling the story of your mother and your great uncle. Sincerely, DJ Cook. Merci, we appreciate you coming. I mean, letters and letters of appreciation. They're really, and I think it's a good thing that we're doing that Bremen is doing that, so the children know a little bit more, because yes, they do read history book, they see movies, but to see person, you know, like the speakers you send there, it makes a difference in their life. So it's a good thing. I'll give you some. Well, I think I'm Catholic, so I believe in God. I think God sent me to Atlanta. My husband was we were stationed in Italy. He was in the military for 28 years. And when we were about done with our tour in Naples, Italy, he asked me where I wanted to go. And I said, Atlanta. He said, why on earth Atlanta? He said, I'm from New York. We have family in New York. Why on earth? And I don't know. Well, the only thing I could remember is when I was a little girl, my parents took me to the movie at least 20 times to see Gone with the Wind. So I said, maybe I'll see Red Butler or someone. So he said, well, guess what? They don't have a place for me in Atlanta. So where else would you like to go? I said, Atlanta. So finally, they made a job for him, or they found one at Fort Gillem. So he ended up being stationed at Fort Gillem, and I got Atlanta. And also, I wanted to become a Southern Belle. I thought, seeing the movie, the ladies from the South were so beautiful and well-educated. And I said, I'm a Southern Belle now. I've been living here long enough. But so that's how we end up in Atlanta. And I became, after a while, after being here, an interpreter for the courts of Georgia. And one day I received a call. They needed an interpreter for the Jewish Film Festival. One of the actresses who was in the movie was French, from Arabic descendant, and she didn't speak any English. So I was called to do that, and I was introduced to a lot of people, and then I met Mrs. Mariella. I can't remember her last name. Bornstein, who's French. And we started talking, and I told her I was impressed with the movie, but I said they need to have movies, I said, with the trains, you know, when the place, I mean, people were escaping from the trains. It's, you know, I was thinking about my mother's story, and I was telling her about my mother's story. And she said, well, you know, she said, they do have some of them. She said, I can't remember their name as we speak, but she said, would you be willing to share your story or your mother's story? My mother was with me that day. She was not too bad at the time. And she said, would you be willing to share it with the Bremen? And I said, sure. And I thought to myself, I'll probably never hear anything out of this. And I let it go, never thought of it. And it took quite a while before you all got back with me. But it took like 2 years before I was put on. You know, they have to train you what to say, what not to say. And so it took some preparation. And finally, I think it's last year, you really let me fly on my own. You released me. So that's what I was going to. Who knows where? What was the last place that I go to? It was really far away from here. Really far away from here. I took my daughter with me. I said, I'm going to be lost. I'll never find Atlanta again from here. That was really in the boonies somewhere. But, you know, I'm a city girl. You know, I'm from Paris. I'm going to the mountains somewhere. But the school was very nice. The children were young and very, very in tune with the story. They had a lot of questions. I was so impressed. I told their teachers, I said, you're doing a great job, because they're asking a lot of questions. You know, sometimes you have kids who fall asleep while you're talking. You know, you're boring them then. That's time to close. But they were all alert and asking a lot of questions and very involved. And it was really good. That's what kept me motivated to teach, to reach the children at an early age, to let them know what happened. Because again, sometimes they don't want to read the book, they don't want to listen, but when they see a speaker, you know, just not myself, but it was new for them, a rescuer. Usually you have the people from the Holocaust here. So it was a little bit different, but you'd be surprised that these young children are interested. They are. It's really unbelievable. So it's really good for me. I feel like I'm really doing something. I'm touching their life just for a few minutes. And they give me hugs, and they tell me they like my accent, and I said, okay. They understand what I'm saying, so that's good. So I enjoy doing that. I enjoy doing that, especially with children. I used to teach them French. Now I'm just sharing my stories with them. So that's how I end up here. Well, thank you for asking. Thank you.